Hi, I'm your host, Brittany Caldwell, and I thank you for joining us on Becoming, a show where we encourage, inspire, and motivate women to become all that God has created us to be. And one of the ways that we do this is through sharing our stories of faith, perseverance, setbacks, and victories. And today's guest who will be sharing her story is Raven Solomon. Raven, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Great. I'm so happy you could be here. So Raven and I, we actually both grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we both went to North Carolina State University. Go Wolfpack.
Go Pack, indeed.
But I have gotten to know more about Raven through preparing for this interview, and I just love your story as one of perseverance, and I know that you all will be inspired by her story as well, so I can't wait for you to hear it. So Raven Solomon is a successful entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and author of the 2019 release, Leading Your Parents, 25 Rules to Effective Multi-Generational Leadership for Millennials and Generation Z. In each of these roles, including founder and president of the Charlotte-based Center for Next Generational Leadership and Professional Development, Raven uses her formidable leadership skills and business acumen to help Millennial and Generation Z professionals reach their full potential as leaders and change makers. She's reached thousands of young people from podiums around the country and partnered with dozens of industry-leading clients to help them attract, develop, and retain young professionals, the future of our workforce. So Raven, wow, that is a lot. You've done a lot.
Thank you for reading that.
Of course. Sure. I mean, you've done a lot, and I can't wait for them to hear how you got to where you are today. Absolutely. But first, I want to take it back.
Yes.
And I want you to just give us an idea of what it was like growing up for you. What was it like as young Raven Solomon?
Ooh, it depends on how young you want to go. But so I grew up, as you mentioned, right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm a Southern girl at heart. I grew up, we started really on the south side of Charlotte. So I was born unto two college graduates. So they both went to Fayetteville State. They were both first generation college graduates. And so they kind of set the tone for us from an education standpoint in that regard. And so, we had a normal childhood up until about the age of 8 or so, when I was 8. So I have an older brother and I have a younger sister. So our life was pretty much normal until about when I turned 8. And at that point, my father, unfortunately, began to partake in drugs. And so from that point on, my father would be addicted to cocaine for pretty much all I could remember. And so when he started to make poor decisions regarding his substance abuse, my mother made the tough decision to leave him for the sake of us and our family and our safety. And so we moved from the south side of Charlotte to the west side of Charlotte, so in the hood, quote unquote. And so being exposed to a lot, I always tell people that we grew up in the hood, but we weren't raised in the hood. So my grandmother and my mother really shielded us from a lot of what was taking place around us. But growing up kind of in poverty, you still see a lot. You socialize with a lot of people that perhaps weren't good choices sometimes.
Right.
But again, thank God for my grandmother and my mother who shielded us from that. I remember one day getting off the bus, and my grandmother would always walk us to the bus stop, and I never understood why, because at the time we were, in our teens, and we can walk ourselves to the bus stop.
Right.
She would always walk us to the bus stop, and it wasn't until one day I got off the bus that I understood why.
Okay.
There was a drug bust happening. So apparently I was catching the bus right in front of a crack house, and I didn't know it.
Okay.
And so it's just those types of things they would do to shield us.
Right.
But, I would grow up. We didn't have a lot for that reason. My mother was an educator. She made $30,000 a year. And so trying to raise 3 kids and take care of herself on $30,000 was difficult. So I would wear hand-me-downs from my cousins, and most of them were male cousins.
Okay.
And so I became the tomboy just by virtue of that.
Okay.
But I started selling candy when I was in middle school. Yeah, so it was against the rules.
Okay.
But I did it anyway to make money.
To help your family?
Absolutely, to help my family. And I saw it as a way, if I could just take care of myself, then I would at least be able to alleviate that burden from my mother.
Right.
So I would sell, Twix and Snickers and Skittles and all that type of stuff. And that was technically my first business. That was the the first time I could wrap my head around this
Right.
idea of profit and
Right.
making money and
Right.
profit and loss and
Yeah.
revenue and all
Right.
of these things, I didn't know what to call it then. And so that's when I realized that I had a business knack
Okay.
or a business mind. So I
Okay.
was in middle school when I was doing this.
Okay.
And so that's when I fell in love with business. But, I went from middle school to high school. I went to Harding.
Okay.
And during that time at Harding, I was a freshman. I was diagnosed with alopecia. And
Okay.
so that's when bullying really started to take place. And
Okay.
it was just a really tough time in general as a young woman, trying to grow into womanhood and,
Right.
and having something like that really impact your physical appearance.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
when you're in the 9th grade, you're just now
Right.
trying to figure all of
Who
that
you
out.
are.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
What you want to look like and all that
Yeah.
type of stuff. But
Wow.
we overcame that.
And you overcame. So how did you overcome that? Because I know that people watching me have also dealt with bullying or anything where they are, I guess their self-worth has been diminished because of other people. So could you explain how you got over that? How did you
Yeah.
overcome that time in your life?
It was primarily, I do a lot of self-talk, and I've always done self-talk for whatever reason. I'm a very introspective person, kind of introverted a little bit in regards to how I at least process information. And so I did a lot of self-talk in regards to really building myself up, knowing that one day it won't be this way, right? One day things will be different. And I used to always tell myself that one day these bullies are going to regret bullying me, and I'm going to make them regret bullying me. So that was my fuel. That was my kind of fire to just continue to do what I needed to do. And I also didn't want to live in the hood. You know what I mean? I just didn't. I wanted more for myself. I wanted more for my family. And I knew, and you probably know this too, sometimes, well, I'll say it this way. There's a Nipsey Hussle song, of all people. There's a Nipsey Hussle song in which he says he can't help but feel like he's the one. And it's the same way for me. I couldn't help but feel like, even when I was young, that it was on me to transcend this poverty, that it was on me to get us out of this, and to become what God has called me and destined me to be.
Right.
And so I always saw a bigger picture. It wasn't about what was happening at the time. I just knew that there was greater ahead. And I wanted people to feel bad one day.
So you knew that there was something bigger in you than your
Absolutely.
situation. Where do you think that came from? Like, who were the most impactful people in your life? Did you have a strong relationship with God? Like, where did that come from, that confidence?
It came from my grandmother.
Okay.
Honestly, it came from my grandmother and my mother. They both were just phenomenally strong women, and they instilled that in me from childhood. And so watching them go through what they went through just inspire me. And I also think in part it's genetic almost. The strength that they had, they just passed down to me. And so I think it came from that, but I also think it came from their standards of me since I was, small. I think they were able to see some glimmer of a spark or whatever we want to call it, and they refused to let it die.
Wow.
And so when I would get a C, if I ever got a C, I mean, I would feel like it was the end of the world. Like I would come home and they'd be down my throat. But my brother, on the other hand, get a D and it's a clap. I didn't understand it. But I think they saw something in me, and they refused to let it die. So I credit them for kind of watering that seed over the years. Until I was able to see it for myself. And I didn't really see it for myself until I got to college.
And then, so what was college like for you?
Wow, college was phenomenal. I mean, I tell people all the time, if there is a place in my life where I could go back to, it would be college. It would be college. Yeah, I would go back to college any day of the week now. College was so good for me because I had gotten over the loss of my hair. I had, kind of come into my own a little bit from a leadership standpoint. And I wanted to be what I wasn't in high school. And what I didn't have the money to be. So I would take, parts of my refund check and I would, finance a little wardrobe because otherwise I couldn't have it when I was in high school. So it was my opportunity to really kind of set the tone for my own life. Up until that point, my life was a reflection or a result of other people's decisions. So primarily the decision of my father to try drugs one day that led to the demise of our family. And so up until that point, it had been a result of everybody else's decisions. But I saw it as, this is my opportunity to now make a life that was a reflection of my own decisions. And so I took it really, really serious.
Yeah.
And so I remember freshman year, I went to check my grades. Or it's a transcript. I'm thinking of a report card. But you go and you check your transcript online. And I go and I check my transcript. And I see that my grades are pretty good. And I scroll down to the bottom, and it says 1 out of 9,000 students.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this can't be right. Something's wrong with this. So I take it to the African American Student Center, and I ask the people that I trust, right? I'm like, hey, how do I get this fixed? I don't think this is right. And they're like, you go to the registrar's office. So I go to the registrar's office, and I give them my transcript. And I'm like, this is wrong. Can you figure out how to fix it? I just really want to know what my class rank really is. And so they go back, they look at the computer, they do what they do, and she comes back and she says, Miss Solomon, there's no mistake. You are indeed number 1 in your class.
Wow.
And I said, wow, this cannot be happening. Wow. But this was first semester of freshman year, so I had a long way to go. A long way to go. Yeah. But at that point, I became almost obsessed with maintaining that rank.
Yeah.
My grandmother had passed right before I went off to college. And the way that she instilled education in me was just like nothing else. And so I wanted to be valedictorian because I wanted to be, but more than anything, I wanted to be valedictorian for her.
Right.
Yeah, although she wasn't there.
Right.
It
to honor her.
To honor her. And so, I kept that as a focal point throughout my college career. I found God in my college career, which obviously has changed my life tremendously. Okay. So it was second semester in my freshman year when I found God.
So tell us about that. How did you find God?
So it's crazy. I was in, you know what the atrium is. So I was in the atrium with a couple of friends.
Where everyone goes.
Yes, everyone goes. That's where the Chick-fil-A is.
Yes.
So you gotta go there. So I was in the atrium one day with some friends, and they started now. I had gone to a Baptist church up until that point in my life. And we didn't go every Sunday. We went to Vacation Bible School occasionally. Yeah. So you kind of in and out, if you will. But we were having a conversation in the atrium one day, and they started talking about the rapture. Okay. And I had never heard anything about the rapture. Now, I'm not saying that all Baptist churches are talking about that. But
your church didn't talk about it.
We just didn't talk about it. And so it scared the living daylights out of me. And I was like, well, I need to get my life together. Right. So at that moment, I made a decision and I made a commitment to stop cursing. Because before that, I had a potty mouth. It was horrible. So I made a decision I was going to stop cursing. I was going to go to church. And I was just going to make an attempt to save my soul. Right. So I started going to church. And at first, it was because I had to, but then I really started to fall in love with God and got to know God and experience the love of Christ for myself, and had very, very, very real and tangible encounters with the Spirit of God. And so those things, you can never tell me that God is not real. Yeah.
And that's an example of how it's so important who we're around. Yes. Like, what environment are we in? Yes. Because our friends impact us so much. Yes. And so for you, it became something at first to where, okay, I'm doing this because I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do, to I actually have an actual relationship with God. Yes. And so now you have that strong foundation.
Absolutely.
That is
amazing. Absolutely. And things have changed, if I'm honest, because when I was in college, I wouldn't say it was a holiness church, but it was very much so a holiness environment. Okay. And so there were a lot of rules, there were a lot of dictations and stuff like that. There wasn't anybody, telling you you can't do X, Y, and Z, but it was inferred, right? And so for me, and I think I get this from growing up in a very strict environment, there's really no gray area. It's either black or white. And so, and you can kind of see that in my studies, right? With me being valedictorian of the largest school in North Carolina, there's got to be something that's this like perfectionistic way. Wow. And so if you give me a rule, I'm going to follow it. Yeah. And so I spent years following rules and years of reading the Bible as if it were a prescription, as if I had to do X, Y, and Z, regardless of where it was in the Bible. Yeah. That if it was written, then that's what I had to do. Okay. And you almost try to be perfect. And that really is the opposite of the message of the gospel, right? I mean, that's what grace is for. That's what mercy is for. And so now I live my life a little differently. It's less about rules, more about relationship, less about following a prescription, and more about the healing itself.
I love that. Because we don't have to be perfect. We serve a perfect God.
That's right.
So that's an amazing story.
Thank you.
And so how did your company come into this picture? When did that happen?
Wow. So that happened, fast forward about, I don't know, maybe about 10 years. So I graduated from college and I joined an organization in which I did a managerial training program with. And so with that managerial training program, I ran a chip route for about 9 months. And after that 9-month time frame, they gave me my first leadership opportunity, and they gave me my first team.
Okay.
So I took on my first team of folks who were old enough to be my parents. It was 16 males, 100% white.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm a young black female, and so there was some difference to overcome. But during that time, I began to fall in love with leadership, and I realized after being promoted once or twice that I was really good at it. Okay. And so I had a great career at this organization, got promoted a couple times, and I think it was my second promotion where I was 2 days into the job, and I got a phone call from my brother, and he was frantic. He told me that my mother had passed out at work and that I needed to get home. And so I was about 2 hours away or so. So I hopped in the car, raced up the highway. I get to the hospital, and by the time I get to the hospital, my mother is gone. So she had a heart attack at 55 out of nowhere.
Wow.
And so what I did after I, was distraught, obviously, for months, got myself together, went back to work, and about 28 days later, I got another phone call that my father has been placed in hospice. And so 30 days apart, we buried my mother and we buried my father. Wow. It's absolutely devastating, but my remedy was work. So I kept throwing myself into work. Kept throwing myself into work. Got another promotion. Blah, 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 blah. Right? And so moving all over, and I come back to Charlotte. Dream job I've always wanted. It was a high-level leadership role. I was 28 years old, probably the youngest person in the company to have this job. So I was at the peak of my career. And then all of a sudden, I started having seizures out of nowhere. And I had a seizure while I was driving. And so as a result of that, I got into a bad car accident. And at that point, I finally put my life on hold, right? I finally pulled back because up until that point, I'd been through so many traumatic experiences, right? And my response was to consistently throw myself into work. That was my remedy. That was my drug of choice, right? My father had a different drug. My drug was work. And so I would constantly throw myself into work. And so when I found myself in that hospital bed after having that seizure and getting to that car accident, I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. So I took about 8 months off of work. Took a sabbatical, if you will, to really focus on me, get my health together from a mental standpoint, spiritual standpoint. And I realized that I hadn't been processing the trauma. I had just been plowing through it. And so I took that time to do that. And about 8 months later, the company called and asked me, was I coming back? I said, no, I'm not coming back. It just wasn't, it wasn't conducive to this new situation I had in my life. And so I left the company cold, didn't have any idea what I was going to do. But I knew I wanted to be a keynote speaker. I always wanted to be a motivational speaker. So I said, well, why don't I try this thing? I mean, I always thought I needed to be a billionaire before I did motivational speaking. I just thought I had to have this big culmination to my life before I had anything to say to anybody. But I found out since that's not the case. And so I started speaking. I started speaking for free. I would speak to the youth. I would speak to college students. But my focus was always on speaking to young professionals in a corporate environment, but also in college. And so fast forward, 3 years later, here we are speaking all over the country.
How has sharing your story impacted the training that you provide for your students?
You know what? So a good friend of mine who is an accomplished speaker, before I started speaking, he told me that the key to my success, the recipe to my success is going to be my story. Regardless of what I talk about, his advice was always tell your story. So there are times I'm talking about networking, or I'm talking about professional branding or personal branding, and I always remember his words in my mind to tell your story. Tell your story. And the more I've spoken and the more opportunity I've gotten to be in front of people, I realize the power of storytelling. It's so powerful. People immediately connect with a story simply because, and there's neuroscience that supports it. There's so many reasons why stories matter to people, but it has literally created so much room for me. It really has. It gives me permission to speak to the hearts of people, whether I'm talking about networking or whether I'm talking about trauma.
Your story is so powerful. So you mentioned it was 3 years before you actually started your own company, from when you stopped working at your last job and were you just doing speaking engagements as they came up and then working part-time? What did that look like?
So I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was, so fast forward 3 years today. So
Okay.
I started my company it was probably about 6 months after I had parted ways officially with the organization. And so it was 6 months of just prayer. It was 6 months of seeking God, just trying to look inside of myself to see what it was I was going to do. So I really asked myself 3 questions when I was considering what I would do with my life from now. So what I did was I searched my mind first, and I asked myself, what am I good at? What are the talents and the skill sets that I bring to the table that differentiate me? What makes me different? Why would somebody pay me versus somebody else? Like, what am I good at? And that turned out to be leadership, right? And I got that kind of validation from my time spent with that organization. So I searched my mind to see what I was good at. The second thing I did was I searched my heart to see what I love. So what is the thing that if I didn't get paid for it, I would still do? What is the thing that I'm created to do? Why am I on this earth? And that was lead people, to influence people. So those 2 things aligned. And then the last thing I did, which is almost the most important in a sense, was I searched the market. So I searched the marketplace to see where the gap was. So if I'm good at it and I love it, but there's no market for it, then I have a hobby. I don't have a business. And so a lot of people have hobbies, not businesses. So we have to search the marketplace to validate the existence of what we're about to do. And so what I found was, while there was a lot of leadership companies and there are a lot of training companies, there wasn't one specifically that focused on millennials and Generation Z and this area of soft skills. Because if you ask anybody of a different generation, what's wrong with millennials today? It's going to be they can't communicate, they don't know how to put the phone down, all of these things that are just nothing but soft skills. And so those 3 things are what led me to make the decision to start my business 6 months after, and it's been an uphill battle.
Of course.
It has been an uphill battle, but now in year 3, I can honestly say that it was the right decision.
You just gave us some wonderful nuggets just now, as far as, because I'm sure there's people that are watching and it's like, I want to start my business, or I want to do that thing that I feel like so passionate about, but I'm scared to leave my job. And you just gave 3 valuable tools that someone can use to actually get them started in the direction that they need to go. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
That's not easy to stop what's comfortable. I feel like you got outside of your comfort zone and you said, I'm going to do this.
So. You know what? I have to credit epilepsy for literally pushing me off the cliff.
Which is what you got diagnosed with after the accident.
That was the final diagnosis. And I just say that God put epilepsy in my life to push me into my destiny. Otherwise, I would still be selling chips. I would still be leading people, still maybe having an impact, but not nearly the impact that I'm having now. And I would have been out of alignment with the will of God. Clearly,
it's like you were pushed into what you're supposed to do. And you mentioned before about stories. You told me once before too that your focus is on leading people, not just the business. Can you expound on that? That's so important.
I feel like the reason I'm now in a position where I teach people how to lead people is because it makes it possible for my impact to be exponential. So in other words, I was once in a position where I was leading people directly. It was, let's say 300 people. That's great. That's really, really good. But now as a leadership trainer, as a people developer, as an author, I now have the stretch to teach, 3,000 people how to lead people. So those 3,000 are then going to lead, let's say, 300,000, and those 300. So the impact becomes exponential.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why I'm passionate about leading people and teaching people to lead people, not lead businesses.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the whole person shows up at the job.
That's right.
Not just their title.
Yeah.
Raven Solomon shows up with everything she went through that week,
That's
with everything that's made up who she is today, not just the title of who you are.
That's
so I think that's so important. I don't know if a lot of people look at the whole person when it comes to overseeing a team.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
So
it's about emotional intelligence.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we teach heavily for that reason that you just described.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, what are the pillars that make up your company?
Yeah.
What do you focus on?
So I focus newly
Okay.
on multi-generational leadership.
Okay.
So that's the main pillar. Generational dynamics in the workplace. So there's this idea that there are 4, sometimes even 5 generations in existence in one office, and so people, as you mentioned, are bringing all of themselves to work with all of their complexities.
Right.
And the generational difference is only one of those complexities, but it's a big one.
Right.
In the way that it shows up in the workplace, and so helping organizations navigate that, helping them leverage that for success is a big pillar. Being an author, which is
awesome.
a newly added title of mine. But it's something that when I wrote the book, it took me about 2 years.
Tell us what the name of the book is.
Yes. So the name of the book is Leading Your Parents.
Okay.
25 Rules to Effective Multi-Generational Leadership for Millennials and Gen Z.
Okay.
So when I wrote that book, it took me about 2 years on and off, and it was literally, Brittany, the hardest thing I've ever done. Second to burying my mother. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It's a huge undertaking. And the reason I wrote the book is really to be a solution for a problem that I once had. So I mentioned I came out of NC State, went into a managerial training program. I was given like 9 months of on-the-job training, maybe 3 or 4 months of other kind of behind the scenes, this is how you lead people. And then I was given a team of 16 people old enough to be my parents, and were tasked with leading them to success.
Okay.
And so it was hard, to say the least. Luckily, I was able to crack the code on it and was able to be successful, but I had a lot of peers who didn't crack the code on it. And so when I was thinking about the type of book that I wanted to write a book that solved a problem. And so thinking back to a problem that I had, right, I searched the market, searched the market to see if there was a tool that existed that would help in a situation like that. Coming out of college, from leading your peers to now going into the workforce, leading your parents. And there was not a resource.
Okay.
And so I figured I'd write that resource.
That is amazing. I love how you saw a problem and you tried to fix it. And you are fixing it through your book.
That's right.
So out of all of this, you have accomplished so much. So this is a question I like to ask all of our guests, but who do you see yourself becoming?
Ooh, who do I see myself becoming? I kind of see the future of my life. I've always been very ambitious. I've always been driven. I've always wanted more, even when I should have been satisfied with what I have, right? And so I guess for the future for me, who I'm becoming, I think is a whole, prosperous woman who is satisfied in all aspects of life. Who is healthy mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and who is fulfilled.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful word, fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like oftentimes it's hard to get to that place of fulfillment. And I don't know if it's a place where you ever actually arrive, but to where you are content in life, you know, and you are fulfilled that the portion that God has given me is enough. Like I have enough to do what he's called me to do. But I'm also not settling because of that. I just know that he's given me everything that I need to walk in what he's called me to do. That's a powerful word that you use, fulfilled. field. And I believe you are becoming that.
Thank you.
All of those things.
Thank you.
So if you could encourage our viewers with anything, who may be going through a similar journey that you went through or are currently going through, what would you want to say to them?
I would say that there's purpose in your obstacles. There's absolutely purpose in your obstacles. I can look back over my life and there's so many bumps in the road. There's so many rocks. There's so many mountains to climb over that could have, stopped my progress. But I chose to put them to use and to make them work for me. And so the way that I now view my obstacles, whether that's epilepsy, whether that's grief, alopecia, or so many other things, bullying, I now see them as stepping stones. So now they come together and they literally make the platform on which I stand and from which I speak. And so I would say there's purpose in your obstacles. Our job is to put them to work and make them work for us. And so make it your platform.
I love that. That is beautiful. Raven, thank you again for coming on the show and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom and journey with us.
Yes.
And I thank you all for watching. I pray that Raven's story was a blessing to you as much as it was a blessing to me. And I look forward to seeing you become all that God has created you to be. Thank you so much for watching.